The kingdom of Israel once celebrated a shepherd boy who became a king. The same young man who once stood before a giant with nothing but a sling had grown into the most powerful ruler the nation had ever known. Songs had once filled the streets about his victories. Nations trembled when his armies marched. The throne of Israel seemed unshakable beneath him. But sometimes the greatest storms in life do not come from enemies across the battlefield. Sometimes they rise from within the walls of our own homes. Years before the rebellion began, trouble had already taken root inside the royal family. Quiet wounds, unresolved anger, and broken trust had slowly created cracks within the palace walls. Those cracks would eventually spread into something far more dangerous. Among David's sons was a prince named Absalom. Absalom was admired throughout the land. People spoke of his striking appearance and confident presence. Wherever he walked, attention followed. He carried himself like a man destined for greatness. But inside Absalom's heart, a fire had begun to burn. Pain can sometimes grow into bitterness when it is not healed. And bitterness, if left alone long enough, can turn into something far more destructive. Instead of seeking peace, Absalom began to nurture his anger. Instead of trusting that God would bring justice, he began to imagine taking matters into his own hands. Over time, that hidden anger hardened into ambition. Absalom did not simply want healing. He wanted power. And power, once it begins whispering to the human heart, can be difficult to silence. Every morning, as the sun rose over Jerusalem, people from across Israel traveled to the city gates. This was where disputes were brought before the king. Farmers, merchants, families, and travelers all came seeking justice. But before they could reach the palace, someone else began waiting for them. The prince. Absalom would stand near the gate where everyone passed. When people approached with their concerns, he welcomed them warmly. He listened to their stories. He nodded with sympathy. He spoke with kindness and understanding. Then he planted a quiet thought in their minds. If only someone were appointed judge in this land, he would say gently, then everyone would receive justice. The words sounded harmless, but they carried a hidden message. The king, he suggested, was not listening. The king was too distant. The king had forgotten the people. Slowly, day after day, Absalom began winning their hearts. He treated ordinary citizens like friends. When they tried to bow before him as a prince, he lifted them up and embraced them instead. His humility appeared genuine. His compassion seemed sincere. But behind the smiles and friendly greetings, something far more calculated was unfolding. Absalom was building loyalty, not with armies, not with weapons, but with influence. 4 years passed this way. 4 quiet years of conversations at the gate. 4 years of sympathy, listening, and subtle persuasion. While the king ruled from the palace, the prince was quietly capturing the hearts of the people. Many did not even realize what was happening. But a slow shift was taking place across the nation. The people who once sang songs about David were beginning to admire his son. What began as simple conversations was becoming something much more dangerous. One day, Absalom approached the king with a request. He spoke respectfully and calmly, asking permission to travel to the city of Hebron in order to fulfill a vow he had once made before God. The request seemed harmless. David granted his son permission without hesitation. But Absalom's journey to Hebron was not what it appeared to be. Secret messengers had already been sent throughout Israel. Quiet instructions had been delivered to trusted allies in many regions of the nation. When the moment came, they were to announce something shocking. As soon as the signal was given, a proclamation would spread across the land. Absalom is king in Hebron, and when the day arrived, that proclamation rang out exactly as planned. Suddenly, the quiet influence Absalom had been building for years burst into open rebellion. Supporters gathered around him quickly. Leaders from various tribes joined his cause. Many people who had once admired David now believed his son should rule instead. The rebellion moved faster than anyone expected. Inside the palace, a messenger arrived, breathless with terrifying news. The hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. In that moment, David understood something painful. This was no small disturbance. This was a full uprising. And if he remained in Jerusalem, the city could become the center of bloodshed. The king who once marched boldly into battle now faced a different kind of decision. Instead of gathering an army inside the city, David chose to leave. He would not allow Jerusalem to become a battlefield. So the king prepared to flee. Early the next morning, the gates of the city opened quietly. There were no trumpets announcing his departure. There was no royal procession celebrating the king. Instead, there was silence. David walked slowly through the streets he once ruled. Behind him followed members of his household, loyal servants, and faithful companions who refused to abandon him. The people of the city began to notice what was happening. Many wept openly as they watched their king leave. This was not the triumphant warrior they once celebrated. This was a weary father walking away from his own throne. Dust rose beneath their feet as they traveled down the road leading out of Jerusalem. The city walls slowly faded behind them. The king crossed the Kidron Valley and began the long climb up the Mount of Olives. Scripture tells us that David walked barefoot, weeping as he went. The same man who once danced before the ark of God now climbed the hill in sorrow. Those who followed him covered their heads and wept as well. The entire scene felt heavy with grief. But even in that moment of heartbreak, David did something remarkable. Instead of clinging to power, he entrusted the situation to God. When the priests arrived carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they expected David would want it taken with him. After all, the Ark represented God's presence among the people. But David refused. He instructed them to return it to the city. "If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord," he said quietly, "he will bring me back and allow me to see it again." Those words revealed something profound about David's heart. Even after everything that had happened, he still trusted God's sovereignty. He did not try to manipulate the outcome. He did not demand control over the future. Instead, he placed the entire situation into God's hands. Behind him, Absalom was entering Jerusalem, surrounded by celebration. Before him, David walked into uncertainty. Sometimes the path of humility leads closer to God than the throne itself. David continued his journey into the wilderness, surrounded by a small group of loyal followers. Though the kingdom appeared lost, his faith remained. And while Absalom celebrated inside the palace, the story was far from over, because the battle for Israel's future had only just begun. The conflict between father and son would soon shake the entire nation. Loyalty would be tested, armies would gather, and a tragedy none of them expected would unfold. The rebellion of Absalom would become one of the most painful chapters in David's life. Not simply because a kingdom was threatened, but because the enemy he faced was his own son. And sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by strangers. They are caused by the people we love the most. Yet even in moments like this, the story of David reminds us of something powerful. God does not abandon his people during their darkest seasons. Even when crowns fall, even when families break, even when the future feels uncertain, God is still writing the story. And the next chapter was about to unfold.